Hi there, my name is Sandra, and welcome to my channel, Whispers in the Wilderness. And so, to tell you a little bit about me, I remember asking a lot of difficult questions when I was a child. I remember learning in elementary school about the solar system, and I remember laughing my fool head off, going, "Are you serious? All these planets being held up there, like with nothing? Like it didn't even make sense to me." Um, when I was 8 years old, I used to come out of church. I grew up in an Anglican church, and later on, like probably when I was 10ish or so, my my stepdad used to take us to the Baptist church that he went to as well. So one week we go to Anglican, the next week we go to the Baptist church. And so I would come home from the Anglican church and I would go downstairs into our basement to the rec room, and we had couches there, and I would line up my teddy bears and my dolls and took my mom's music stand, and I would start preaching the whatever was being said at church that day, the sermon, I would repreach to my dolls and to my teddy bears until I was caught by my mother, and then I stopped because she made me feel icky about what I was doing. But anyways, that's just a little bit, and I remember asking my mom when I was a young girl, because we grew up in an Anglican church, and at the time it was all men that were ministers or deacons or ringers of the bell, and women's role was to do like the child care, basically, children's church, shall we say, during the service, and they could play the organ, but for the most part women were not involved. So I remember as a young girl asking my mother, "Does God even like us girls?" Because I'd hear all these stories about these men in the Bible, and I'd never hear stories of any girls, any women. And so these are just kind of like a few of the things I want to touch on in this on this channel. Okay, in 2019, so I'd stepped away from the church for a while ago, or for a couple decades. And then finally, I came back probably 20 odd years ago. I came back to the church, started attending a Baptist church. That's what I found that I like the best. And then in 2019, so I was what I call a pew warming Christian. And then in 2019, I went through a lot of difficult times in my life, and I have dubbed that year as my Job period, because it was most challenging I've ever experienced in my life. So towards the end of 2019, I was thinking, okay, 2020 is going to be different. It's 2020 vision. That's what 2020 stands for. And so I was going to get my eyes set on what goals I wanted. I was going to decide what my goals and dreams were and chase them, because things had kind of settled down to a certain extent, and I could chase my dreams. And so I had a vision for 2020 and how it was going to look. But of course, the start of 2020, we got that kicker. And then, yeah, what slowly happened in 2020 is I realized that no, 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 no. And in hindsight, I can see it now. Father had a vision for what he was going to bring about, his goals, his needs, and those became the forefront of my brain and my thoughts and my daily life, as opposed to my own thoughts and dreams and goals. They became his. So 2020 was really interesting because I started reading the Bible for myself instead of trusting on a minister or a pastor. Father took me to, I remember dusting off, it's so funny. I remember taking out my grandmother's Bible that I inherited. And ironically, when I was about 8 or 10, somewhere around there, my family had purchased this for her when we were down in the States somewhere. I'm in Canada. And we were down in the States, and it literally came in this beautiful cedar box. It was gorgeous. And it was a white leather-bound KJV with the gold trim. And it was a beautiful Bible, but the spine was never cracked. She never read it at all, unfortunately. So I inherited that. So I was very fortunate to get that. So I cracked the spine. I was the first one to crack it. And I remember taking a pen to it the first time, going, should I do this? Should I not do this? Oh my gosh, am I desecrating this Bible or what? But it was funny. But Father took me to the book of Revelation, a book I'd never heard of. Well, I've heard of it. All I've ever heard is the second coming of Jesus. That's all I've ever heard. And that there'd be all kinds of signs and symbols and whatnot. And so when I read the book of Revelation, it was like quite astonishing. I'm like, really? All of this is supposed to happen? Like, whoa. And so then he took me to the book of Genesis, and I read Genesis. And this was my second time reading Genesis, I think, second or third. But he said to me, these are the bookends. These are like, because, and now I know the end will be like the beginning. So you have to kind of know the bookends. And then he took me to a book I'd never known or heard about before, and that was the book of Enoch. And he told me that this fills it in. This fills it in. So, and then slowly as I go through my steps, I start walking Torah, because I'm seeing about Torah online, and to me it how it made sense. If you want to be Father's people, then you better do as Father says and step into covenant. And so I stepped into covenant, and by 2021 I had literally stopped all the traditions of men, which is Christmas, Easter, Valentine's, birthdays, all that stuff. And I started keeping the Shabbat, the Sabbath. I started learning the Hebrew names of Father and Son in particular. I went through a couple of what I call just enunciations. Sometimes people enunciate the name differently, and sometimes it just didn't fit. And I think what I was trying to do initially is I did it out of fear. I was scared. But then I realized, no, stop fearing. Let Father lead you. And so I was led into the names of Yahuwah for Father and Yahusha for the Son. And so that's what I will say in my videos going forward. I will try to use the name Father and Messiah, or Father and Son, just so that I don't sort of offend anybody. But these are the names I use, and I will not interchange the other names at all. So, and then I started learning about the feasts, and by 2020, I think was the first year I really kept all the feasts, or 2022, sorry. So, it's called a process. It's a walk. It's called a walk for a reason, which suggests that one is moving along, going along. And so if somebody, and I've encountered people like this, if somebody believes the same thing they believed, 20 years ago, they're not even out for a stroll, let alone a walk. They're not running. They are stagnant. They are staying still. They're staying in one place. And it kind of means to me that they are closed-minded to learning anything, which is a shame. And so I think I need to say that. So I may say some things in my videos that you probably have never heard or never thought of or never entertained. So what I suggest, instead of having a knee-jerk reaction, which a lot of people do, and knee-jerk reactions are your flesh. That's all it is. Knee-jerk reactions come from self. They don't come from wisdom. There's a difference. As I suggest that you listen and you ask questions. I took a conflict resolution course, and I've read books on conflict resolution. And the key thing that they teach whenever you have a disagreement with somebody is the first step is seek to understand. So seek to understand where somebody's coming from. Ask them questions. Why do you say that? Why do you feel that? Why do you, what do you have as evidence for that? Ask those important questions, okay? Therefore, you understand where that person is coming from. Then, after they've explained it to you, if you disagree, if you come up with an opposing evidence, then give the opposing evidence. So a lot of what I believe, Father's actually revealed to me before I had the scripture to back it up. He then leads me to the evidence, and that is how I truly know that it's from him, because I couldn't possibly have dreamt it up on my own. He shows me things, and they're usually in pictures. And then he leads me to the evidence pertaining around it. And then I study it. I love to study. So I'm what I call a Berean. So he leads me to so much evidence that my Facebook posts were so long that few people really read them. And so few people were impacted by them. It's interesting because last weekend I was at a market and there was a young gal there. And I think she's a pagan young gal. But anyways, we struck up a conversation. And she made a very great point, a very valid point. And she said, you know, when we went through 2020, when everybody was locked down and in their homes, that's when TikTok exploded. And so TikTok was like immediate hits. It was like as you scrolled, hit, dopamine hits. And so as you scrolled and you got these dopamine hits, it also trained us to think in little tiny spurts. And so our attention span thinks in little tiny spurts. And so that's the problem, especially when you do long Facebook posts. So what I'm going to try to do on this YouTube channel is I'm going to try to give you little spurts. I'm going to attempt to keep my messages under 10 minutes. And even if I have to post 10 of the 10-minute videos, then that's what I'll try to do. Or maybe 30 minutes. We'll see. Because I'm at 11 minutes right now, and this doesn't seem like any time to me at all. So that's the reason for me starting this channel, really, is to try to reach a different group of people that I can't reach on Facebook, despite having 3,000 plus friends. Only a handful of people, really half a dozen people, see my posts on a regular basis. So that's a problem. We now are currently, I believe, in the wilderness. And so because we are in the wilderness, I've named my channel Whispers in the Wilderness. And I pray that the whispers that I make will plant seeds in Father's garden, and that He will be the one who waters them in order to grow the harvest. And so if you have any questions, if you have any comments, if you have any suggestions, I would love to hear them. And as always, take everything to Abba, everything. Everything I say, everything any man says. Take it to Abba and trust no man. Shalom for now.